I'll wipe your father's $10,000 debt right now, if you can beat me in one hand of cards, Park sneered, his voice cutting through the jazz playing in the lounge. His crew of well-groomed investors snickered as he leaned back, swirling a glass of expensive whiskey. Zara clutched her notepad, her knuckles turning white as she looked at the rigged deck on the table. Behind her polite waitress mask, her mind was a whirlwind of panic. The predatory lenders had given her 48 hours before they seized the Mitchell family diner. Park smirked at her hesitation, his dark suit and arrogant posture radiating a false sense of authority. He enjoyed the power imbalance looming over the girl in the black and white uniform who seemed like an easy target for his scheme. "I don't play games with people who stack the deck," Zara replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. The men at the table shifted, their amusement turning into a cold, dangerous edge. Park's eyes darkened as he reached for her wrist, ready to force the issue. Then, the heavy oak doors of the lounge swung open. The air in the room didn't just cool, it froze. A man with sharp, tailored clothes and ink crawling up his neck walked in with a relaxed, dominant gait that made Park's bravado look like a child playing dress-up. It was Lee Tae-sung. The investors scrambled to their feet, their faces turning a sickly shade of gray as their leader, the real boss, approached. Tae-sung didn't look at them. His eyes were fixed on Zara, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Leave the girl," Tae-sung commanded, his voice a low, melodic threat. He pulled a heavy gold clip of cash from his pocket and tossed it onto the table without breaking eye contact with Zara. "Your father was a man of honor, Zara Mitchell. It's time the Mitchells were under my protection, not my subordinates' greed." Zara took a breath, the weight of the room shifting entirely. She knew this moment represented a terrifying new world, but as Tae-sung gestured for her to follow him, she realized the easy target had just found the most dangerous shield in the city. The silence in the lounge was absolute, a heavy shroud that made the clinking of Park's ice cube sound like a gunshot. Lee Tae-sung stood at the head of the table, his presence dwarfing the men who, moments ago, had acted like kings. He reached out and picked up the rigged deck of cards Zara had identified. He fanned them slowly, his eyes never leaving Park's trembling form. "A rigged deck in my house, Park?" Tae-sung's voice was dangerously smooth, like velvet over a blade. "You've become quite the businessman while I was away, preying on waitresses and stacking cards. Is this the empire you're building for me?" Park's face had drained of all color, his skin turning a sickly, waxy gray. "Boss, she's just a server. The diner owes money to our associates. I was just—" Tae-sung slammed the cards onto the table, the sharp crack echoing off the gilded ceiling. Park flinched so hard he nearly toppled his chair. "Her name is Zara Mitchell," Tae-sung corrected, his tone dropping an octave, "and you will address her with the respect you owe me. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, pulled me out of a burning car in the district 10 years ago when I was nothing but a soldier with a target on my back. He didn't ask for a reward. He didn't ask who I was. He just did what was right." Zara felt the world tilt. She remembered the scars on her father's arms, burns he had always claimed were from a kitchen fire at the diner. She looked at Tae-sung's tattooed neck, realizing now that the ink was likely masking scars of his own. Tae-sung turned towards her, his expression softening into something unreadable but no less intense. He swept the stack of chips and the wad of cash he'd thrown down towards her side of the table. "The debt is gone, Zara. Consider the interest paid in full by the disrespect you suffered tonight." Then he turned back to the men at the table, his eyes turning back to ice. "As for you, get out. If I see any of you within a mile of the Mitchell diner, you won't be worrying about debts. You'll be worrying about how long you can hold your breath underwater." Park and his associates didn't wait for a second warning. They scrambled out of the lounge, nearly tripping over their own feet in their haste to vanish. Zara stood alone with the man the city whispered about in terrified tones. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced with a trembling realization of her new reality. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice finally cracking. Tae-sung stepped closer, smelling of expensive sandalwood and cold rain. "Don't thank me yet, Zara. Debt in this world never truly goes away. It just changes hands." He pulled a silver pen from his pocket and scribbled something on a napkin. "My driver will pick you up at 8 tomorrow. You're wasted behind a tray, and I have a vacancy for someone who can spot a lie as fast as you did tonight." The black sedan arrived at the Mitchell Diner exactly at 8, its polished surface reflecting the neon "open" sign that had flickered for 30 decades. Zara watched from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her father was still asleep, unaware that the crushing weight of the predatory lenders had been lifted by a ghost from his past. She smoothed her skirt, took a breath, and stepped out into the morning air. The ride was silent, a blur of gray city streets that ended at the base of the Zenith Tower, a glass and steel monolith that seemed to pierce the very clouds. Zara felt small, her sensible shoes clicking on the marble floors of a lobby that smelled of white lilies and power. When the elevator doors opened on the penthouse floor, the city fell away. Lee Tae-sung was standing by a floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the bright morning sky. He'd traded his heavy coat for a charcoal vest, his tattooed forearms exposed as he poured 2 cups of tea. The office was minimalist, cold and calculated, much like the man himself. "Sit, Zara," he said, not turning around. She sat in a velvet chair that cost more than her family's car. "You said the debt was gone," she started, her voice steadier than she felt. "But you also said debt just changes hands." Tae-sung turned, placing a steaming cup in front of her. "I cleared the street debt because it was an insult to your father's legacy, but the diner is still bleeding, and the bank doesn't care about old stories of heroism. They want $50,000 by the end of the month to stop the foreclosure." Zara's stomach dropped. It was a sum she couldn't earn in 5 years of double shifts. "I am offering you a position," Tae-sung continued, leaning against his desk. "My organization is expanding into legitimate hospitality, hotels, high-end lounges, real estate. I am surrounded by men like Park who only know how to take. I need someone who knows how to see, someone who understands the floor, the people, and the small details that reveal a person's true intent." He slid a contract across the desk. The numbers at the bottom made her dizzy. "Work for me for 30 days. You will be my eyes and ears during negotiations. You will help me vet the staff in my new ventures. If you succeed, the diner's mortgage is paid in full, and your family is set for life." Zara looked at the gold-plated pen sitting on the mahogany surface. The gilded offer was a cage, but it was a cage made of the only thing that could save her father. "And if I fail?" she asked. Tae-sung leaned in, his dark eyes reflecting her own desperate image. "In my world, Zara, we don't plan for failure. We just live with the consequences." She picked up the pen. With a single fluid motion, Zara Mitchell signed her soul over to the Korean Mafia, trading the safety of her apron for the danger of a throne. The first high-level meeting took place in a soundproofed boardroom draped in shadows and the scent of expensive cigars. Tae-sung sat at the head of the table, a silent monolith of power, while Zara stood just behind his shoulder, dressed in a sharp suit that felt like armor. Opposite them sat 3 men from a rival shipping conglomerate, their smiles as bright and artificial as the city lights below. To anyone else, the meeting was a standard discussion of logistics and percentages, but as the hours ticked by, Zara realized her perspective was shifting. For years, she had survived the diner by noticing the invisible, the customer who checked the exit because they intended to dash on the bill, the subtle twitch in a regular's jaw that signaled a complaint was coming, or the way a couple avoided eye contact when they were lying to each other. She began to watch the lead negotiator, a man named Cho. He spoke with practiced confidence, but Zara's eyes drifted to his hands. Every time Tae-sung mentioned the northern docks, Cho's thumb would ghost over the side of his fountain pen, a nervous, rhythmic friction. When Tae-sung moved the conversation toward the offshore accounts, Cho's eyes didn't widen, but his breathing rhythm hitched, a microscopic break in his composure that only someone used to waiting for an order in a crowded room would catch. During a brief recess, Tae-sung led Zara into the private foyer. "Tell me," he commanded, his voice a low vibration. "They're lying about the northern docks," Zara said, her voice hushed but certain. "Cho is confident when he talks about the money, but he's terrified of the location. He's fidgeting with his pen, a classic self-soothing gesture. And the man to his left, he keeps looking at his watch not because he's late, but because he's waiting for a signal. They aren't here to negotiate, Mr. Lee. They're here to stall." Tae-sung's gaze sharpened, a flicker of genuine intrigue crossing his features. He reached out, his fingers grazing the fabric of her sleeve. "You see the truth beneath the noise. Most people in my world are blinded by their own ego, Zara. They look, but they do not observe." When they returned to the room, the atmosphere had changed. Tae-sung no longer leaned back, he leaned in. Based on Zara's insight, he pivoted his strategy, pressing Cho on the one vulnerability he had tried so hard to hide. By the time the meeting adjourned, the rival group was shaken, their leverage dismantled by a woman they dismissed as mere decoration. As the boardroom cleared, Tae-sung looked at Zara with a dangerous kind of respect. Zara realized then that her weakness, her life spent serving others, was actually her greatest weapon. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was the most dangerous set of eyes in the room. While the upper floors of the Zenith Tower were bathed in light and quiet refinement, the lower depths of the organization curdled with resentment. Park sat in a dimly lit betting parlor, the air thick with cheap cigarettes and the sour tang of failure. The bruise on his ego was far more painful than the physical threat Tae-sung had leveled at him. "He's losing his edge," Park hissed to his two closest associates, his voice a jagged whisper. "Tae-sung thinks he can bring a girl from a grease-trap diner into our inner circle and call it progress? He's insulted every man who bled to build this family." His men nodded, though their eyes held a flicker of lingering fear. They had seen Tae-sung's wrath, but they also saw the opportunity Park was dangling. In their world, a leader who showed sentimentality was a leader who was ready to be replaced. Park leaned forward, the shadows dancing across his face. Tae-sung isn't just protecting her, he's relying on her. She's his eyes, his new favorite toy. That makes her his greatest vulnerability. If the eyes see something that isn't there, or if they fail to see a knife coming, the head falls. He pulled a thin, encrypted tablet from his jacket, scrolling through surveillance photos of Zara leaving the diner and entering the tower. He didn't see a woman who had saved a negotiation. He saw a girl who still looked over her shoulder when a car backfired. She was soft, she was untrained, and most importantly, she had a father who was still very much within reach. "We don't move against Tae-sung directly," Park explained, a predatory grin spreading across his lips. "Not yet. We make her look like a liability. We feed her false intel, let her lead the boss into a blind alley, and when he's reeling from the betrayal, we step in to clean up the mess. By the time I'm done, Tae-sung will be forced to eliminate her himself, or he'll go down with her." Park tapped the screen on Zara's face, his thumb lingering over her image. He wasn't just planning a coup, he was planning a lesson. He wanted to see the light of hope he had seen in the lounge extinguished. To Park, Zara Mitchell was a symbol of a past Tae-sung should have buried, and he intended to bury it for good, along with anyone who dared to stand in his way. The vulture was no longer circling, it was preparing to strike. The following Tuesday, Tae-sung didn't take Zara to a boardroom. Instead, he drove them himself, his armored sedan winding away from the glittering skyscrapers and into the narrow, crowded streets of the district where the Mitchell Diner stood. He parked in an alley behind a crumbling community center, the bricks stained with generations of soot. Zara watched him carefully, expecting a shakedown or a cold business transaction. Instead, she found herself following him into a bustling soup kitchen. The air smelled of ginger, garlic, and steam. The people here didn't cower when Tae-sung entered. Instead, the elderly women behind the counter nodded with a familiarity that stunned her. Tae-sung moved through the room with a different kind of authority, not the dominant weight of a warlord, but the quiet gravity of a man visiting home. He stopped at a table where an old man sat alone, struggling to open a jar of medicine. Without a word, Tae-sung took the jar, twisted it open, and handed it back with a slight, respectful bow. "You're late with the donation this month, Tae," Uncle grumbled, though his eyes were warm. "The docks were busy, Uncle, but the school supplies for the neighborhood children have already been delivered." Zara stood by the door, her heart performing a slow, painful ache. She had seen him order the dismantling of a shipping empire, yet here he was discussing the price of heating oil with a grandmother. She realized that the money he moved through the city wasn't just for luxury, it was a silent levee holding back the flood of poverty for thousands of people in the district. Later, as they walked through a small park where children played beneath the watchful eyes of Tae-sung's silent security detail, he finally spoke. "People call me a monster, Zara. Perhaps I am, but a monster with a code is a guardian. A man who breaks his word to the weak is just a common thief." He stopped at a bronze plaque dedicated to the neighborhood's founders, his fingers tracing the name of a man Zara didn't recognize. "Park thinks power is about how much you can take. I believe power is about how much you can protect." For the first time, Zara didn't see the tattoos or the tailored suit as symbols of danger. She saw a man who had survived a burning car and spent the rest of his life ensuring the fires didn't spread to those he cared for. Her loyalty, once a product of debt and fear, was beginning to transform into something far more dangerous, genuine respect. She was no longer just his eyes, she was starting to see the man behind the myth. The atmosphere inside the Zenith Tower shifted overnight, turning from clinical precision to a cold, suffocating suspicion. Zara felt it the moment she stepped off the elevator. The guards, who usually offered a curt, respectful nod, now looked through her, their eyes like chips of flint. She moved towards Tae-sung's office, but for the first time, she was intercepted. Park was standing by the mahogany doors, a jagged, triumphant smile playing on his lips. In his hand, he held a thick manila envelope. "The boss is busy, Zara," Park said, the mock sympathy in his voice making her skin crawl. "We're dealing with a security breach, a leak." "I have work to finish," Zara replied, trying to push past him, but Park stepped into her path, his shadow looming over her. "Funny you should mention work. We found something interesting in the restricted filing room, a digital trail, encrypted messages sent from a terminal registered to a Z. Mitchell, detailed logs of our last 3 meetings, including the names of our shipping partners, all directed to a specialized task force at the precinct." Zara felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. I don't even have access to those files." That's what makes you so good, isn't it? The quiet waitress, the observant girl. You weren't just watching our enemies, you were cataloging us. You're a rat, Zara, a pretty little informant sent to finish what the fire 10 years ago couldn't. The doors swung open, and Tae-sung appeared. His face was a mask of unreadable stone. The warmth Zara had seen in the soup kitchen was gone, replaced by the terrifying void of a man who had been betrayed before. Park stepped forward eagerly, tossing the envelope onto a side table. It spilled open to reveal grainy photographs of Zara meeting a man in a dark coat, a man she recognized as a regular from the diner, but who the documents identified as an undercover detective. "I didn't do this," Zara said, her voice small but firm as she looked directly into Tae-sung's eyes. "He's framing me because I saw him cheating the first night. He knows I see him for what he is." The silence that followed was agonizing. Tae-sung looked at the evidence, then at Park, and finally at Zara. The loyalty of his entire organization was hanging in the balance. To protect a suspected informant was to invite a mutiny. "Take her to the holding room downstairs," Tae-sung commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "No one touches her until I've verified the signatures." As Park's men grabbed Zara's arms, she saw the flash of pure predatory joy in Park's eyes. He hadn't just planted evidence, he had planted doubt. And in Tae-sung's world, doubt was a death sentence. The holding room was a concrete box that smelled of damp earth and old secrets. Zara sat on the edge of a metal chair, her heart a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew the clock was ticking. Tae-sung was a man of logic, but Park was a man of chaos, and chaos didn't wait for verification. The sound of the heavy iron door groaning open made her jump. It wasn't Tae-sung who entered, but a young guard she recognized from the soup kitchen, a boy whose grandmother Tae-sung had helped. He didn't speak, he simply tossed a burner phone onto her lap. The screen was already glowing with a live feed from a security camera she'd hidden at the diner months ago for her father's safety. Her breath hitched. The diner's windows were shattered, the neon open sign hanging by a wire, buzzing like a dying insect. Park stood in the center of the wreckage, his boot on a stool holding a canister of gasoline. Her father was zip-tied to a chair in the corner, his face bruised but his eyes defiant. Park wasn't waiting for Tae-sung's orders anymore. He was burning the evidence of his failure. "He's going to kill him," Zara whispered, the realization cutting through her fear. "He's going to burn it all to force the boss's hand." The guard leaned in, his voice a ghost of a sound. "The boss is being watched by the council. He can't move without proving your guilt or innocence first, but the back service elevator is unlocked for the next 3 minutes. If you leave, you're a fugitive. If you stay, your father dies." Zara looked at the burner phone, then at the open door. Fleeing meant confirming Park's lies. It meant becoming the rat everyone thought she was. But as she watched Park splash gasoline near her father's feet, the survivalist silence she had carried her whole life finally shattered. She wasn't just a waitress or an observer anymore. She was a Mitchell, and they didn't go down without a fight. She grabbed the burner phone and the guard's discarded tactical knife from the table. She didn't head for the exit, she headed for the garage. She knew Tae-sung's fastest car, and she knew the city's back streets better than any mobster. As she tore out of the Zenith Tower, the tires screaming against the pavement, she realized she was no longer running from the fire. She was bringing the storm to Park's doorstep. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for the only man who had ever seen her for who she truly was. The smell of gasoline was thick enough to choke on as Zara skidded the black sedan to a halt, the tires biting into the glass-strewn pavement in front of the diner. She didn't wait for the engine to die before she was out, the tactical knife gripped tight in her hand. Inside, the diner was a graveyard of her childhood memories, overturned booths, smashed ceramic plates, and the scent of her father's signature coffee masked by the stench of fuel. Park stood over her father with a Zippo lighter, the small flame dancing in his eyes. He looked up, his grin twisting into a mask of pure malice. "The rat returns to the trap," he mocked. "I didn't think you had the spine for it." Zara held up the burner phone. "I have more than a spine, Park. I have your records," she said, her voice dropping into a cold, clinical calm that mirrored Tae-sung's. "I found the digital fingerprint while I was observing the boardroom logs. I sent it to Tae-sung 5 minutes ago." Park's grin faltered. The sound of a second car, a heavy, low, growling beast, announced Tae-sung's arrival. The doors of the diner were kicked open, and the boss stepped into the wreckage. He didn't look at Park. His eyes went straight to the gasoline-soaked floor, and then to Zara. The evidence was sloppy, Park, but the betrayal, that was precise. Desperate and cornered, Park lunged toward Zara, intending to use her as a shield one last time. But Zara didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She remembered every rowdy customer she'd ever had to handle, every predator who thought she was small. As Park reached for her, she stepped inside his guard, using his own momentum to drive the hilt of the tactical knife to his temple. As he stumbled, she followed with a low sweep to his legs, a move she'd watched the guards practice a dozen times in the tower. Park hit the floor hard, his head bouncing off the linoleum. Zara stood over him, the point of the knife hovering inches from his throat. She wasn't trembling. Tae-sung walked over, his heavy boots crunching on the glass. He placed a hand on Zara's shoulder, not to stop her, but to claim her. "He's not worth the blood on your hands," he whispered. He looked down at Park with a look of utter disgust. "Take him. He'll find out exactly how I deal with thieves in my house." As his men dragged a screaming Park into the night, Tae-sung turned to Zara. He looked at the wreckage of the diner, then at the fire in her eyes. "You saved the legacy, Zara. Now let's build a new one." 6 months later, the smell of fresh paint and expensive espresso had replaced the lingering scent of gasoline and old grease. The Mitchell family diner was gone, replaced by the Lion's Hearth, a sleek, modern sanctuary where the district's working-class roots met the refined elegance of the Zenith Tower. The neon sign outside no longer flickered, it burned with a steady, confident gold. Zara stood behind the polished marble counter, no longer in a black and white uniform, but a tailored silk blouse that moved with her. She watched the room with the same sharp, observant eyes that had once dismantled a shipping coup. She noticed the way a busboy hesitated near a rowdy table and gave him a subtle, reassuring nod, a silent signal that she was watching and she was the shield. The door chimed softly, and the air in the room shifted. Lee Tae-sung entered, dressed in a dark suit that made the morning light seem dim by comparison. He didn't head for a private booth or a hidden corner. He walked straight to the counter and sat on the same stool where Park had once held a lighter. "The numbers for the first quarter are in," Zara said, sliding a leather-bound folder across the marble toward him. "The hospitality branch is outperforming the shipping lanes. It turns out people prefer a place where they feel protected rather than preyed upon." Tae-sung opened the folder, but his eyes remained on her. "You've turned a street-corner diner into the heart of the district, Zara. My advisors are still trying to figure out how a Waitress managed to stabilize the entire Southern Territory. Because I know what it's like to be the easy target, and I made sure everyone in this city knows that under this roof, the prey has teeth." Tae-sung smiled, a rare, genuine expression that reached his eyes. He didn't treat her like a subordinate or a debt to be repaid. He treated her like a partner. The gilded offer had been the beginning, but this was the destination. Together, they had bridged the gap between the underworld and the light, creating a new kind of power that wasn't built on fear, but on a fierce, unbreakable loyalty. As her father stepped out of the kitchen, looking healthy and proud in his new chef's whites, he shared a silent nod with the man who had once been a boy in a burning car. Zara realized the debt was finally settled. The past had been paid in full, and the future was a menu they were writing together. She was no longer just his eyes, she was his equal, standing at the center of a new empire where no one would ever be an easy target again.